Everyone thought I was crazy in 2019 when I started talking about this. You now have 10 countries in the BRICS fold, including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. You have 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals on the planet right now. You have a larger swath of human population, a larger swath of global GDP, the majority of the shipping lanes in the Middle East, the majority of the rare earth metals all on the Eurasian continent, the majority of the oil production in the world, and another 25 have informally applied. You're talking 90% of human population. You're talking a way bigger military might, much more GDP, all of the world's commodities, all the shipping lanes. This is not something to take for granted. And the rest of the world is, or at least the West is, taking this for granted.
Andy Schectman, a well-known precious metals analyst and president of Miles Franklin Precious Metals, firmly believes that the rapidly expanding BRICS alliance is on track to achieve all its objectives, including the creation of a gold-backed currency to challenge the US dollar. Schectman asserts that this development will mark the end of the dollar's reign as the world's unmatched reserve currency and the decline of Western dominance. Over recent months and weeks, he has observed numerous indicators pointing toward this shift, suggesting that these signs will continue to emerge gradually before culminating in a decisive and dramatic change. Little by little, then all at once, Andy predicts. Schectman explains that while these indicators may seem insignificant now, they are like pieces being pulled from a Jenga tower. Eventually, the removal of one final piece will cause the whole structure to collapse rapidly, catching everyone off guard. This pivotal moment will reveal the futility of Western skepticism about the BRICS alliance's success and clear the path for the end of the dollar's supremacy. Currently, the Western world appears largely indifferent to the threat posed by the BRICS alliance. From policymakers to the media and everyday investors, many argue that the significant cultural differences among BRICS members will prevent them from effectively collaborating to achieve their ambitious goals. But over the past year, we've seen how much these perceived enemies are willing to cooperate to achieve their objectives. In a recent interview with Capital Cosm, Andy gives a dire warning about how close we are to that all-at-once moment, which may potentially lead to the end of the dollar's status as the world's reserve. However, the most alarming part of Andy's warnings is how American politicians are intentionally pushing us closer and closer to this inevitable collapse with their policies. We will present clips from Andy Schectman's interview. But before we do, please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks, and enjoy the video.
My view of the markets right now, in essence, is that we are really kind of at a crossroads. We're near a Rubicon, and I guess we can start by, since you brought up oil, to me that's really the linchpin of everything that's happening. I ask people often, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency, and very few people know the answer to that question. And prior to, right after World War II, we signed an agreement called the Bretton Woods Agreement, where we became the world reserve currency, taking over for the pound sterling. And at the time, the promise was to other governments, hey, we will honor a fixed rate of gold at $35 an ounce. So you take our dollars, and anytime you want to exchange them into gold, it'll be at $35 an ounce, fixed. And it was that way until 1971, when President de Gaulle from France largely realized that we were printing more dollars than we had gold backing it in Fort Knox, the Treasury, and he sent warships over to New York Harbor filled with dollars, saying, "Give us our dollars. You're creating more money to fund the Vietnam War. We want our gold." And we did. We gave him largely what he wanted, and at that point, Nixon closed the gold window, because within a matter of weeks or less, all of the gold would have been gone. So he went back on our promise. The dollar was backed by nothing at that point. When it was a few years later, in 1973 or 1974 rather, that in fact it will be 50 years in a few days, 5 days, I believe it's 50 years, that we signed, 50 years ago, we signed the petro agreement, Kissinger did, with the Saudis. And the agreement was, we will protect you, and for that protection, you and OPEC will value oil in dollars globally, and the proceeds or any excess will go into U.S. treasuries, recycle your excess into treasuries. And it's been that way for 50 years. And it has created a synthetic demand for the dollar where every single country in the world has had to stockpile dollars. And I think that trend is nearing an end. And the ramifications of this I believe, is being vastly underestimated by the public, by the elite, by the economists, by everybody. And a lot of things have happened over the last couple of years that is pushing this trend, accelerating it to the point where I think we are very, very close to ultimately losing the petro status. You could argue we've already lost our hegemony. We have not lost our supremacy, but we have lost our hegemony. And when you realize that the one thing that makes the dollar really is our relationship with Saudi Arabia, probably the dumbest thing that you could do would be to sign an executive order to go green. And that is exactly what Biden did when he came into office. He signed an executive order to go green. But I think it's also relevant to note that the lead economic advisor for the United States government is a bonehead named Jared Bernstein. And a lot of people have seen his interview on Twitter recently, where he was trying to explain how the U.S. sells bonds and uses the proceeds to fund its debt. And he couldn't even get 3 words out of his mouth. That was really embarrassing. But this is a man whose main thesis is to lose the dollar's reserve status, that he's written reports on it called Dethrone King Dollar, picked up in the New York Times. When Trump slapped tariffs on China, he said, great, we'll lose our reserve status now, hopefully. That was picked up in the Washington Post. He's the lead economic advisor to the U.S. government. So if indeed you do want to lose the petro status because it creates distortions and economic imbalances, as he claims, the first thing you would do would be to say to the Saudis, hey guys, thanks for the memories. It's been great. So much so that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia recently came out and said, China was our most important trading partner in 2023 and will be for the next 50 years. Those numbers were chosen, or those words were chosen very specifically. In 5 days, it marks the 50-year anniversary of our petrodollar status. But we're going green, right?
Andy says, in addition to the ill-fated green initiatives, countries in other parts of the world have been made more aware of the hypocrisy of the Western world. When U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen made a trip to Beijing in April, she warned Chinese companies against exporting products to Russia, claiming that doing so could aid Moscow's war against Ukraine. Yellen added that companies that disobeyed the directive would face significant consequences. Andy explains that Yellen's orders are completely hypocritical, especially given how much money the U.S. and the rest of the Western world have sent to Ukraine. Additionally, the U.S. should not be one to talk about a country invading another, given its history of doing just that, most times with fabricated evidence to support the invasion and brutality. Recent reports indicate that G7 countries are exploring ways to utilize Russia's frozen financial assets to support Ukraine's war efforts against Moscow. Finance officials from the G7 economies convened in Stresa, Italy, to brainstorm methods for leveraging approximately $280 billion of Russia's foreign currency reserves, which were frozen by Western nations following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Several prominent analysts, including Andy and Jim Rickards, have warned that these actions could potentially topple the entire global financial system. Let's get back to the interview.
So you see, my point I'm trying to make is that a lot of the Southern Hemisphere views us as being wholly hypocritical. And it's one thing to sanction and freeze assets. It's a whole other thing to confiscate those assets. 5 billion of the 280 billion that they want to confiscate or they have frozen of the Russian assets are in the United States. They want to use those $5 billion in dollars to provide weapons to the Ukraine. The other 280 billion that's being floated around that will take the interest of those frozen treasuries, about 4 or 5 billion a year, and use those to rebuild the Ukraine and provide weapons against the country they are fighting. Now, I see a problem with this. Look, I'm an American patriot. I grew up in this country, and as I mentioned, the least likely character to have ever achieved the success. I thank God every day for this country and the opportunities it gave me. But the leaders of this country are doing some very dumb things, and in particular, signing an executive order to go green, undermining the hegemony of the dollar, weaponizing the dollar. And all of this really came to a head before all of this started when we left Afghanistan in a way that was very much un-American, leaving, 3,000 American people behind enemy lines and turning our back on the interpreters and the freedom fighters who we gave them a promise, we'll give you visas on the way out, and we didn't. This was not lost on the rest of the world because 2 days after that happened, Saudi Arabia signed a military protection agreement with Russia. Now, keep in mind, we've been protecting them for 50 years, and that's what's given us the dollar hegemony. They decided to do it with Russia. What else has Saudi Arabia done? Well, they have formally applied to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the largest regional and financial and financial organization on the planet. They've formally applied and have been admitted into the BRICS. They've told people in Davos that we're open to taking other currencies for oil. You can see things are breaking away from all of this. It took 200 years to create our first $1 trillion. We're doing it every 100 days. Every 100 days, we're adding $1 trillion in debt. We have a almost $35 trillion debt, but that doesn't take into account Medicare Part B, $99 trillion underfunded. Medicare Part D, the prescription, $22 trillion. Social Security, $77 trillion. Government and military pensions add up to about $150 or $60 trillion in the hole. And a trillion seconds ago, 31,688 years ago. Game's over. So it's bad enough we've done all of this stuff. We could probably figure out a way to get out of this. But, people look to the United States and have for a very long time as a beacon of liberty and justice and freedom, a shining light, if you will, right? Well, let's talk about that for a minute. How about the questions regarding our electoral process? I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. Is it fair? How about the judicial system? I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. Is it fair? Is there a two-tiered standard of justice? Is justice blind? How about the lawlessness in the cities, the open borders where 17 million people have entered this country illegally? 1% want to fuck with this country. That's 170,000 people. How about 5%? Well, you're getting up real high there. At 5%, you're talking what, 800,000 people? That's bigger than any standing military. How about the fact that we've lost our bearing in terms of being woke, in terms of moving away from the nuclear family? All of these things that made this country great, people are looking at cross-eyed. And so if you really did want to lose the reserve status, as Jared Bernstein advocates for, the lead economic advisor to this country, well, let's see. Sign an executive order to go green, weaponize the dollar against Russia, against Iran, and no one in the world, let alone the Southern Hemisphere, will ever trust us again as we confiscate their assets in a hypocritical manner. And then we let this country lose its bearings, the borders, the cities, the lawlessness, the inflation, the two-tiered justice system, the questions surrounding the electoral system. All of this stuff makes people in this country say, what the hell is going on? And the rest of the world saying, this is our chance.
While few are contemplating the full economic impact if the dollar were to lose its status as the world's reserve currency, there is a consensus that such a shift would be both severe and dramatic. In a scenario where the dollar is no longer the dominant reserve currency, the proportion of US treasuries held by central banks and foreign entities would drastically decline. Over the past 2 decades, these institutions have owned between 50 to 75% of foreign-owned US debt, according to Treasury Department data. Currently, foreign countries hold $7.4 trillion in treasuries, accounting for about 24% of total US debt. As this financial burden gradually shifts back to the US, borrowing costs would soar, making it harder for businesses to flourish and for the economy to grow. The stock market would likely suffer significant losses. Analysts like Andy Schectman advise investors to protect their wealth by investing in assets such as gold and silver. Do you agree with Andy that this could be part of a larger plan to trigger a financial reset and increase control over Americans and their resources? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on post notifications for more updates. Thanks for watching.